He promised me forever, but when I carried his child, he chose pride over love and left me shattered. Alone, humiliated, and betrayed, I faced a world that judged me. Yet from the ashes of heartbreak, I rose stronger, turning pain into power and silence into justice. I once believed love was enough to conquer everything. When I met him, my heart clung to the idea that he was the man I was meant to spend my life with. His words were smooth, his promises endless, and his touch carried the warmth of security. I was young, hopeful, and foolishly certain that fate had blessed me. I gave him my trust, my loyalty, and eventually, my body, believing our love was strong enough to withstand any storm. But life has a cruel way of revealing truths hidden behind illusions. When I found out I was pregnant, I thought it would bind us closer. I imagined him holding my hand, sharing my joy, and dreaming with me about the family we would build. Instead, that moment became the start of my greatest heartbreak. I told him about the child with trembling excitement, expecting his embrace, but what I received was silence first, then an expression I will never forget, cold, calculating, and distant. His words sliced through me. He wasn't ready, this wasn't the plan, his family would never accept me, and most importantly, I wasn't worth the sacrifice of his reputation. In that instant, I realized the man I had built my dreams around was nothing more than a coward who cared more for society's whispers than the life we created together. He abandoned me without hesitation, discarding me as if I were nothing but a mistake he regretted. His family didn't just reject me, they humiliated me. They called me shameless, accused me of trapping him, and treated me as though I had ruined their honorable name. The very people I thought I might one day call family were the first to tear me down. Their words were poison, spreading through the community until my neighbors, friends, and even distant relatives looked at me differently. I became the subject of gossip, a warning to other women, a symbol of disgrace. Every time I stepped outside, I could feel the weight of their judgment. They didn't see a woman in pain, they saw an example of failure. Carrying my child alone was not only a physical struggle but a constant reminder of betrayal. I spent countless nights crying into my pillow, my hands clutching my belly, whispering apologies to the baby inside me. I felt guilty for bringing a child into a world where the father had already turned his back. I questioned my worth, wondered what I had done wrong, and tortured myself with the thought that maybe I truly wasn't enough. The loneliness was unbearable. Friends disappeared, family kept their distance, and the man who once swore to protect me was nowhere to be found. Financially, I was drowning. Jobs were hard to find, especially with a growing belly and a reputation that followed me like a shadow. Employers didn't want to take a chance on me. To them, I was irresponsible, someone who had failed to keep her personal life together, and if I couldn't control that, why should they trust me professionally? I took whatever work I could, cleaning, typing, late-night shifts that left me exhausted and aching. Every coin I saved felt like a victory, but every bill reminded me of how much harder life was going to be. The physical toll of pregnancy weighed heavily on me. I carried more than just a child, I carried shame, heartbreak, and anger. There were days I wanted to give up, days I wished I could vanish, but then I'd feel a tiny kick from within, and I knew I had no choice but to keep going. My child didn't ask for this life, didn't ask for an absent father or a mother drowning in sorrow. I owed it to my baby to be strong, even when I felt like collapsing. The whispers of society cut deeper than any wound. I heard the insults, the cruel laughter, the sly comments disguised as advice. They said I should have been smarter, that I should have known better, that I had ruined my future. They predicted I would end up a burden, begging for help, raising a child doomed to struggle. Their words were designed to break me, to convince me that my life was over. For a while, I almost believed them. I almost let their voices define me. But then one night, as I sat in the dim light of my small apartment, tears streaming down my face, my hand resting on my stomach, I felt the strongest kick yet. It was as if my child was reminding me they were there, alive, waiting for me to fight. In that moment, I realized I had two choices: surrender to the cruelty of life, or rise above it. I couldn't erase the betrayal, but I could decide what to do with the pain it left behind. That night, I made a silent promise. I promised my child I would never let them feel unwanted, never let them see me as weak, and never allow the world to dictate our worth. I would carry the scars of betrayal, but I would transform them into armor. The man who abandoned me thought he had broken me, but he had unknowingly given me a reason to rebuild myself stronger than ever. I started small. Every insult became fuel. Every rejection pushed me harder. I stopped waiting for sympathy that would never come and instead focused on survival. I read whenever I could, studied whatever material I could get my hands on, and reminded myself daily that knowledge was the key to freedom. I didn't know exactly how I would rise, but I knew one thing for certain: I would never again let anyone have the power to decide my future. The child growing inside me became my anchor. In every heartbeat, I found strength. In every kick, I found courage. My pain had turned into a purpose. I no longer cried over the man who walked away because I realized he had already lost more than he could ever understand. He gave up on me, he gave up on his child, and in doing so, he gave up on the chance to be part of something extraordinary. People continued to whisper, his family continued to sneer, and the world continued to doubt me. But little did they know, those days of shame were only the beginning of a story that would one day turn their whispers into silence and their judgment into regret. My journey of survival had begun, and with every breath, I prepared myself for the day I would rise, not just for me, but for the child who gave me a reason to fight. Raising a child alone was never the life I envisioned, yet it became the reality that shaped me. Sleepless nights blended with long days of labor, and every sacrifice I made reminded me of the betrayal that had placed me here. But instead of drowning in sorrow, I turned every tear into determination. I knew my child deserved more than a mother who surrendered to pain. I wanted to give them a future untouched by shame. The whispers never stopped. People mocked me for daring to dream beyond my situation. They said women like me didn't rise, we survived at best. Those words became my fuel. I refused to let my life remain a cautionary tale whispered behind closed doors. If society expected me to fail, I would prove them wrong in ways they could never imagine. Education became my weapon. Between feedings, diaper changes, and endless chores, I studied. Every book I opened felt like a step away from the chains that bound me. The law fascinated me, not only as knowledge but as power. I realized that the same system people used to humiliate women like me could also be used to defend us. If I understood it, I could protect myself and others from being crushed by injustice. It wasn't easy. Many nights I studied by candlelight while my baby slept. Exhaustion gnawed at me, but the thought of giving up was more unbearable than the weight of fatigue. I worked small jobs to afford classes, waitressing, tutoring, even cleaning offices at night. There were moments when I felt invisible, scrubbing floors while imagining myself standing tall in a courtroom. Each paycheck was me buying not just food and shelter, but a piece of my future. The first day I stepped into a law class, I felt out of place. My clothes were worn, my face showed the strain of sleepless nights, and I was older than many of my peers. But my heart burned with something they didn't have: hunger. I wasn't just there for a degree, I was there to rebuild my dignity. Every lecture, every note, every exam carried the weight of my redemption. Some professors noticed my determination. They encouraged me, often marveling at how fiercely I absorbed knowledge. What they didn't see were the sacrifices behind my persistence, the skipped meals, the ignored invitations, the loneliness I endured. But I didn't need them to know. My scars weren't excuses, they were proof of my commitment. As the years passed, I slowly built my path. When I graduated, I didn't celebrate with champagne or a party. I held my child in my arms and whispered, "We made it." That piece of paper wasn't just a degree, it was a shield, a sword, and a key to doors once slammed in my face. Starting my career was another uphill battle. Many still saw me as the abandoned girl with a child, not a lawyer. I had to fight for cases no one wanted, clients who could barely pay, and situations too messy for established names. But I took them all. I listened to women whose voices shook with the same fear I once knew. I saw myself in their stories, betrayed, humiliated, discarded, and I vowed to fight for them with everything I had. Each victory, no matter how small, strengthened me. I began to earn a reputation not just as a lawyer, but as a fighter. I wasn't afraid to take on powerful men, corrupt families, or institutions that silenced women. People started recognizing me not as a victim of abandonment but as a voice for justice. The same society that once mocked me now whispered my name with respect. My child grew alongside my success, and I taught them resilience through my actions. They saw me tired but never defeated, scarred but never broken. Their smile became my reward, their pride my healing. For the first time, I felt I was giving them the future I had promised on that lonely night years ago. Yet, deep inside, a wound still throbbed. No matter how much I achieved, I couldn't forget the face of the man who left me. I had proven the world wrong, but I hadn't faced him. I wondered if he lived in comfort, still believing he had escaped the consequences of his cruelty. That thought burned in me. My fight for justice wasn't complete until I confronted the one who had caused my fall. Fate, however, has its own timing. Just as I had rebuilt my life, just as I was standing strong in my profession, destiny began to weave his name back into mine. When destiny finally brought me face to face with him again, it wasn't in a street or at a chance encounter, it was in the courtroom. The same place where I had built my identity, earned my respect, and carved my power. I had taken on hundreds of cases, but when I opened the file and saw his name, my hands froze. It was the name that once defined my heartbreak, the name tied to my shame, the name that had haunted me for years. He was no longer the man I remembered. The arrogance remained in his eyes, but the polished sheen of invincibility was gone. He was being sued for fraud and corruption, his reputation already hanging by a thread. I had been appointed to represent the other side, and in that moment, I understood, this was not coincidence. This was fate delivering him back into my path, not as a lover, not as a betrayer, but as an opponent. The first day of trial, my chest tightened as I walked into the courtroom. Across the room, his eyes locked on mine. For a moment, the years fell away, and I was that broken girl again, pregnant and abandoned. But only for a moment. Then I remembered who I had become. He had walked away from me, but here I stood, a lawyer strong enough to fight him. I refused to let his gaze reduce me to my past. When I rose to speak, my voice carried a steadiness I didn't feel inside, but that steadiness soon became real. I laid out the evidence with precision, exposing cracks in his defense, unraveling the lies he tried to present. He avoided my eyes most of the time, but whenever he dared to look, I made sure he saw no trace of weakness. The whispers in the courtroom told the story better than I could. People who knew our past exchanged glances, murmuring as realization spread. Once, his family had mocked me publicly, called me a stain on their honor. Now, their precious son sat in the defendant's chair, while I stood tall as the lawyer tearing apart his case. What they had used to humiliate me had transformed into my greatest victory. He tried to intimidate me. His lawyers questioned my credibility, tried to throw personal attacks, hoping to shake me. But they didn't understand, I had been shaken before, humiliated before, destroyed before. And I had rebuilt myself stronger each time. No words they spoke could wound me deeper than what I had already endured. Every attempt to undermine me only exposed their desperation. During cross-examination, I looked him straight in the eye and asked the questions no one else dared to ask. I watched him squirm, his arrogance crumbling with every contradiction. He tried to maintain composure, but the man who once abandoned me without hesitation was now cornered, powerless under my words. It was almost poetic, justice unfolding not just legally, but personally. As the trial continued, the contrast between us became undeniable. He came from privilege but was sinking into disgrace. I came from humiliation but had risen into strength. Every statement I made echoed beyond the courtroom, reminding him of the woman he had once left behind. Except I wasn't that woman anymore, I was the one who now held power over him. Flashbacks haunted me as I spoke, moments of pleading with him to stay, moments of crying alone while carrying his child, moments of hearing his family insult me. Those memories fueled every argument, sharpened every word. I wasn't just fighting a case, I was fighting the ghost of my past, determined to bury it once and for all. The audience could sense the history between us, even if they didn't know the full story. They leaned forward as if waiting for a hidden truth to spill out, as if they could feel the tension threading through every glance, every word. And maybe that was the most satisfying part, he could no longer hide behind the image his family built for him. He was exposed, stripped of the mask he once wore. Day by day, the evidence piled against him. Documents, witnesses, testimonies, each piece stronger than the last. I spoke with the conviction of someone who had lived through betrayal and refused to be silenced again. The courtroom became my battlefield, my words my weapons, and my determination the shield that protected me. One afternoon, during a recess, he finally approached me. His voice was lower, no longer filled with the confidence I once knew. He said my name, almost as if he expected me to soften, to remember the love we once shared. But I looked at him and felt nothing but resolve. I told him calmly that whatever history we had no longer existed. The only thing that mattered now was justice. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes, not fear of prison, not fear of scandal, but fear of me. By the final week of trial, the roles had reversed completely. I was the one in control, and he was the one trapped in the cage of his own actions. His family, the same family that once spat venom at me, sat in silence, powerless to save him. Every word I spoke was another nail sealing the coffin of his reputation. As I prepared my closing statement, I realized something. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every woman who had ever been abandoned, humiliated, or silenced. It was about showing that betrayal could be turned into strength, that pain could be reshaped into justice. I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was fighting for all of us. And as I stood before the judge, with him trembling in the chair behind me, I knew one thing with certainty: the girl he left broken had died long ago. In her place stood a woman he could never destroy, a woman he would never escape, a woman who had turned his greatest betrayal into his greatest downfall. The day of the final verdict arrived, and I felt a quiet calm settle over me. Years of struggle, sleepless nights, and relentless determination had led to this moment. I stood not just as a lawyer, but as the woman who had been abandoned, humiliated, and underestimated, and now, the one holding power over the man who thought he could break me. As I addressed the courtroom one last time, every word was deliberate, measured, and unwavering. I dismantled his defense, piece by piece, exposing every lie, every omission, every attempt to manipulate the truth. He tried to interject, tried to reclaim control, but I had learned long ago that he could not intimidate me. This time, he was powerless, and I was the force of justice he could no longer escape. With each sentence, I felt the weight of my past lift. The humiliation, the sleepless nights, the endless struggle, they had not been wasted. They had prepared me for this exact moment. I realized that my revenge wasn't about anger or cruelty, it was about reclaiming what had been stolen from me, my dignity, my honor, and the life I had been denied. The courtroom was tense, the silence almost deafening. I could see it in his eyes: fear, disbelief, and the dawning realization that he had misjudged me. The man who had walked away thinking I would crumble had underestimated the strength born from survival. I had taken every wound, every insult, and every betrayal and forged them into the power I wielded now. When the judge finally delivered the verdict, it was everything I had worked toward. Victory. Justice. Recognition. He was held accountable for his actions, and the weight of the law pressed down where his arrogance and deceit had once protected him. The same man who had abandoned me, believing he had no consequences to face, now sat shattered, stripped of reputation and influence. I could have gloated. I could have reveled in the poetic justice of it all. But I didn't. Revenge had never been about humiliation, it had been about transformation. I had been broken, and I had risen. I had been silenced, and I had spoken. I had been powerless, and now I stood unshakable. That was my triumph. He looked at me then, desperation in his eyes, as if seeking forgiveness that I would never grant. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to feel the satisfaction of knowing he understood, finally, what he had lost. But I said nothing. Words were unnecessary. His ruin spoke louder than anything I could utter. Turning away, I took my child's hand in mine and walked out of the courtroom. The whispers, the judgment, the cruelty that had once defined our lives were gone behind us. I had become a shield and a guide for the future, showing that pain can be transformed into power and betrayal into purpose. My child looked up at me with pride and trust, and I knew that everything I had endured had been worth it. Outside, the world seemed quieter, kinder, as though acknowledging the victory not just of law, but of resilience. I had rebuilt my life on my terms. Every rejection, every humiliation, every sleepless night had led to this: freedom, justice, and the knowledge that no one could ever take my strength from me again. I didn't need his apology, his recognition, or his presence. I had what mattered most: dignity restored, a child safe and loved, and the certainty that I could survive anything. The scars remained, but they no longer weighed me down. They reminded me of the battles I had fought and won. As we walked away, I felt a quiet sense of closure. The girl who had once been abandoned in despair had grown into a woman unshaken by betrayal. She had turned heartbreak into a weapon, pain into purpose, and injustice into triumph. The man who thought he could define my life now existed only in the shadow of my success, a testament to the strength that betrayal cannot break. I had returned stronger. I had reclaimed my power. I had left him shattered. And for the first time in years, I smiled without fear, without doubt, knowing that our story, my story, was finally mine to control. If you felt the power of this story, remember, strength comes from surviving betrayal, and justice belongs to those who fight for it. Subscribe now to our channel for more gripping tales of revenge, resilience, and triumph. Hit the bell so you never miss a story where the wronged rise stronger, the betrayed find justice, and every twist leaves the guilty shattered. Share this video if it inspired you, and join our community of warriors who refuse to let betrayal define them. Your next story of vengeance awaits, don't miss it.